Keir Starmer's fond of giving things away that I'm starting to wonder if he's a bit of a commie. His bizarre deal to give away the Chagos Islands, despite stitching up the UK and US and benefiting China in the process, is quite frankly unexplainable. Just a few months ago, the esteemed Peter Hitchens explained how Starmer was a man of the extreme left whose roots can be found in Trotskyism.
What makes you suspect of Keir Starmer personally?
Starmer himself is a man of very interesting background. I think his struggles over what I find actually the rather dull subject of the transgender issue are interesting. The reason why he struggles over it is because he is, by inclination and politics for a long time, a person of the very, very far left. He was mixed up with a tendency called Pabloism in his 20s, which is an outward branch of Trotskyism.
Interesting. So are Sir Keir's commie tendencies the reason he was cozying up to Chinese leader Xi Jinping just a few days ago at the G20? I wonder what they talked about. What's also interesting is how our Prime Minister once ended up in communist spy files after visiting a Czechoslovakian work camp at the height of the Cold War. Yes, you heard it. The then 23-year-old was apparently one of 17 students from around the world in 1986 to peek behind the Iron Curtain for a memorial to victims of a Nazi atrocity. All very strange. Anyway, back to the current day. Starmer has apparently sent newly appointed National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell to the Chagos Islands to get the deal over the line before Donald Trump takes office in January. It wasn't meant to take place until spring, and we're even paying Mauritius for the privilege, though Downing Street does refuse to say exactly how much we're coughing up or where the money's coming from. Nigel Farage recently explained why the Americans are so furious about the decision.
I've spoken to people close to the incoming Trump administration, and there are deep concerns about a Mauritian government that is moving a long way to the left, that doesn't appear to like America very much, that is getting closer to China. It's all well and good saying there's a lease deal, but hey, we heard there was a lease deal on democracy in Hong Kong, and look what's happened to that. It would have been very difficult to do the Gulf War, very difficult to do the Iraq War without Diego Garcia. It is that and Guam are the only real assets America's got in that whole part of the world.
So why is Sir Keir Starmer doing it? Our Prime Minister's been behaving like he wants to destroy our relationship with America at a time we need them most. He's refused to condemn the International Criminal Court's massive overreach to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, even failing to rule out that the Israeli PM would be arrested if he lands in Britain. And Starmer's been happily allowing Ukraine to lob long-range British missiles into Russian territory. Trump calls it a blatant attempt by the outgoing Biden administration to wreck his incoming presidency by trying to start World War III. This all comes, of course, just months after more than 100 Labour activists campaigned for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in Pennsylvania just before the election. So if not the UK or America, just whose interests does the Prime Minister have in mind when deciding to ditch the Chagos Islands? As ever, the Prime Minister remains an enigma. But let's get the thoughts now of my panel. Esther Kraku, columnist and broadcaster Alex Armstrong, and the former Labour Minister Bill Rammell. Good evening to you all. Welcome back.
Evening.
Alex Armstrong, is Keir Starmer deliberately trying to wind up the incoming US president?
So this is really interesting, right, because this deal doesn't look like it's going to be done until the early stages of next year anyway, and there's potential that it's going to be held up in judicial review. So even if he's trying to speed it up, it doesn't look like he's going to be able to hold off the Trump administration regardless. I could be wrong. Bill might be able to clarify a little bit more on parliamentary procedure on that. But I will say this whole policy is a complete disaster. It was clearly intended that a Biden administration would come into office and continue their support for whatever they're doing in the Chagos Islands. So whatever happens here, we're getting a lot of foreign policy that Starmer and Lammy have sort of flown around the world to get all these deals. They tried to get a deal with Joe Biden originally months ago to get the long-range missiles. They were laughed out of the room by Biden. He's only changed course now. So I wonder whether this is more of a Biden administration thing to frustrate Trump more than it is Starmer, and Starmer's just doing the bidding.
But we have to remember this started under the Tories. So this process was started under the Tory government. So and they must take the blame for even initiating this, because David Cameron actually said he was not interested, and he completely put a hold on that. That being said, I think this is a very bad faith way to act, because they're clearly trying to speed this up, knowing that the Trump's administration are not going to be happy about this. And also, it's a really bad way to start our relationship with this new administration. I still cannot believe David Lammy's in a job after calling calling what now is going to be the next president of the US a Nazi sympathizer and fascist. I mean, whatever your views on politics, it is so unprofessional, and knowing that you could potentially represent this country, sitting in front opposite Donald Trump, it's awkward and it's embarrassing. And people undermine the importance of human relationships and diplomacy, but like calling someone a fascist doesn't go a long way.
Apparently, Nigel Farage brokered a meeting. David Lammy talked about how he had dinner with Donald Trump. He had extra chicken, and Trump was very generous.
You wait until he's president.
Well, let's come to the facts at the heart of this. And I declare an interest. For 3 years, I was the Foreign Office Minister responsible for our relations with the Chagos Islands. I negotiated compensation. I negotiated with the Chagosians in Mauritius, because that's where the vast
majority... How much are we giving them, Bill? You should know. The Downing Street are refusing to say. Give us a figure. Well,
in terms of the base, we never give details of that. No government ever has. But the reason...
You can tell me, though.
But no, the reason this has come about is our position...
Hang on, Bill, give me a punt. Give me a figure.
Let him finish.
Tens of millions, probably. Our position was becoming untenable. We were going to face defeat in the International Court of Justice over sovereignty over these islands. And we therefore faced a choice. Do you either reject international law, and I don't think that's the right course, and see our base at Diego Garcia put at risk, or do you negotiate a deal?
We didn't have to do that. We never gave the Chagosians a choice,
Esther. We negotiated a deal, a good deal, a 99-year renewable lease. That's very different to what existed within Hong Kong, and it secures ours.
How was that a good deal
if
it completely ignored the interests of the Chagosians? The Chagosians weren't asked whether they wanted to be handed back to Mauritius. If you asked the Chagosians whether they would actually have British citizenship over Mauritian citizenship, guess what? 100% of them would choose British, because we actually have a decent human rights record. The Mauritians didn't. The Chagosians were originally put on that island to farm coconuts.
Go back to 2004 when I was negotiating with them, and they wanted sovereignty to go to Mauritius.
Wait, hold on. How is it a good deal if you are cutting out the people that are directly impacted by this and rushing it and then handing them back to an ally of China, which is the most important factor here? It's not a good deal.
Nobody lives in the Chagos Islands. They are distributed around a range of locations.
So then why does Mauritius have it?
The biggest proportion of them live within Mauritius. That's why the deal was done in that way.
I think this goes back to something you were saying a little bit earlier, Bill, which is that we are clearly acting like a declining and unpowerful nation. If this was America's land...
Like a dying empire.
It's constantly dying. If this was America's land, to hell would they give it up? For anybody, right?
I think hold on, the elected US government encouraged us to reach this agreement.
The new elected ones are going to have something to say about it.
My point was, Bill, is that it's not their sovereignty. They don't care. As long as what the base protected, that's the bit they care about, right?
Absolutely, and that's what we're concerned about as well.
Right. It was an ICJ court ruling in 2021.
Non-binding.
Which James cleverly adhered to. Why didn't he just turn around and say, no, stuff it, the Chagos Islands are ours, it's a strategic military base for us and the United States? And even now, the US government, Trump and his team are saying, this is one of our only bases in that territory, alongside Guam, where we have any presence in that part of the world.
Because if you want pariah states in the world to abide by the rule of international law,
they're not going
you
to
can't
anyway.
blithely reject it when it goes against
they're
you.
Not going
That's
to
what
anyway.
drove the British government under both the Tories and under this Labour government, and it's what drove the Biden administration. Now, in terms of Trump, you know, he being in the White House, the special relationship is important, but it's going to be a bumpy ride.
He's going to retaliate. He holds all the cards.
Hold on, Esther. What you can't do is jump to every erratic whim that he comes up with. We've got to sit him down, explain the deal, why it's in both of our interests. And do you know what? I don't think this is.
It's not going to be in both of our interests. Absolutely not. But this is the thing. This is what happens when politics is run by people who live in La La Land, as if for some reason despots around the world. No, our politicians. Well, yeah, because as if despots around the world are going to respect the rule of law and respect the UK because we've handed out a strategic military base to some island that has loyalties with China. It's ludicrous.
We haven't
I'm sorry.
Sorry, let's talk the facts. We haven't handed it over.
How did Hong Kong
it is
turn out?
a legally protected 99-year lease that is renewable.
Wasn't Hong Kong handed over after 99 years? How did that turn out?
It wasn't renewable.
Aren't the people in the UK?
Let's debate the facts, Esther.
Seeking asylum from Hong Kong? No, I'm sorry.
It wasn't renewable.
You got to let him finish.
Look at the historical record.
That's why China is persecuting people from Hong Kong.
Yeah,
because it wasn't renewable.
Because the mandate of the legal deal ran out.
And I'm sure China respects us a lot more.
In respect of Diego Garcia is very different. It's 99 years and then it's renewable.
Honestly,
May I just say, I think I'll go back to my previous point, is that we are acting like a declining nation. We're acting like a nation where that's lost its power. If this was Thatcher and it was the Falklands, which the Americans also told us to give up before we went to war, we would have given over the Falkland Islands, right? So it's about how our politicians perceive our position of power. Now, I understand there's a case to be made. The Americans have said, get rid of it. We want the base to be protected, and there's a whole court ruling on that. We can get into the nitty-gritty on those things. But I do think that there is a sense, and why the British public is so incensed about this is because they feel this is more signs of a declining country.
What evidence have you got that the British public are incensed?
Well,
there's no polling evidence on it.
Well, look, I think, Bill, if you were to speak to most average Joes in Britain, they would
it's
feel
only,
rather
it's only
upset.
strategic asset in that region.
It goes back to that. I genuinely do believe that.
I think
most
average Joes aren't aware of the issue.
Do you think... so Keir Starmer is in charge now. He's our Prime Minister. He's our leader. He has the power not to do this.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any truth in my suspicion that he's happy to do this because he's just a bit of a commie?
No.
I'm struggling not to come out with an expletive, Ben. That's
absolutely not.
Is he a communist?
No, of course he's not.
Peter Hitchens was talking about
Peter Hitchens is bonkers. Certifiable.
His origins in Pavlovism, which is an offshoot of Trotskyism. You don't think he has any communist leanings?
Look at his actions in opposition and in government.
Well, he's taking from the rich.
He's a centrist Labour leader that's a million light years away from being a communist.
He may not be a communist, but I definitely think he's Orwellian, and that's my personal opinion on the way that he's conducting the state. I don't think he's a communist.
He's not a communist.
Do you think Peter Hitchens is talking rubbish?
He's not talking rubbish. I mean, his history pans out, but like he was 23. People change their political leanings from a young age all the time. He's not, I'm sorry, like holding him because of what he did at 23. I mean, Peter Hitchens was a Trotskyist. He was self-confessed Trotskyist.
Yeah, that's where he speaks from. He says, "I'm an expert on this."
But he changed his mind.
Peter's claim now is that he is such an expert on Trotskyism because Peter was a Trotskyist. He can recognise the signs now in somebody. He says, so Keir Starmer hides it very, very well.
Keir Starmer is not...
I've been fighting Trotskyists all my political life. Keir Starmer, I recognise them. I smell them. Keir Starmer's not a Trotskyist.
No, I think Bill's absolutely right. I don't believe he's a communist. And that would be, if that was the case, we'd be giving away all of our taxpayers. We would be living under a 70%, 80% tax regime.
Alex,
and the winter fuel payments...
We are giving away all our taxpayers.
Well, no. Listen, I'm certainly not agreeing that we're not being taxed way above where we should be. But things like the winter fuel payments, a communist would never have agreed to that.
Or tax education.
So he is doing a bit of austerity, which I think goes against that in his current day as Prime Minister. However, as I said, I think when you're looking at the way he's conducting the state in terms of the Home Office, I think people do feel there's a sense that they're living under some form of Orwellianism. And that is where people should pay attention because, Yvette Cooper is doubling down on non-crime hate incidents. She's not getting rid of them like any sensible person would.
Well, she said that there's going to be a fundamental review of them.
Well, she said the other day that...
We're going slightly off topic. It just seems to me, I don't know if you would agree, panel, that Keir Starmer doesn't seem to be making... Maybe he's not making a deliberate effort to wind up Trump, but he's not making efforts to...
This issue has not been anywhere near Donald Trump. Nigel Farage is freelancing. Yeah, he's freelancing to try and exaggerate his influence.
How do you know that? How do you know that?
When the Trump presidency starts, and this deal is not being speeded up. It's not going to happen
how do you know
before Trump actually takes office.
Will it need a vote in Parliament?
Yes, it will.
Right.
The bill's going to come back for scrutiny before the deal takes place. And I think when we engage with the Trump administration, they'll end up supporting it.
And there's a wider question we have to ask ourselves as Brits. America is thriving, its economy is blowing up, ours is stagnating, Europe's is stagnating, it lacks competitiveness, and Starmer is dragging us closer to the part of the continent, and unfortunately is going down, not up. We need to be tying ourselves much closer to the Trump administration in terms of economics, because that's where the money is. And we need our economy to grow. We've just seen thousands of job cuts today, and we've got to go to where the growth is.
If Trump goes down the road of tariffs, God help us all.
Well, no, I spoke to Eric Trump, his son, last week, and he said Britain won't have any tariffs as long as we play nice. So no more sending activists over to the US, no more calling him a Nazi sympathising sociopath or whatever David Lammy said. Those were his words. Play nice.
But David Lammy has quoted Trump's book today, which I think is another 360 on his opinions.
All right, we've got